Thanks everybody for being here. My name is Jorge Gaviria. I'm the founder of Masienda, which you probably know because you bought a press or a bundle from our site. So thank you so much for that. You are all here because of the Mi Cocina bundle and Sassy Tortilla Press celebration around Rick Martínez's book, Mi Cocina. Our host clearly obviously needs no introduction. He is a jack of many trades, but he is the author, obviously, most notably of Mi Cocina, which we now all own. It is a many-time bestseller. I think it sold out in every newspaper, all the superlative lists it is currently. No big deal, but also a James Beard Award nominee, the host of Sweet Heat on Food 52, and the highly entertaining podcast Borderline Salty, which I personally really love. But he is also best known as Choco's dad, which I don't see right now, right? So you'll have to make sure he makes an appearance.
He's actually, yeah, you know what? So just so that we have the introduction, he's over here. Yeah, there he is.
I was worried it was all smoke and mirrors, and he didn't really exist.
No. He was standing behind me, and then I almost fell on top of him. So I was like, no, you need to go out of the kitchen because I don't want to kill my dog today.
Well, as we are cooking through Mi Cocina, your Cocina, Rick, want to acknowledge that you are currently in an Airbnb, so it's going to we should be expecting a newly renovated kitchen soon. But I will promise everyone here that you will get the first tour of Rick's very new kitchen when it's available via Masienda Cribs Zoom edition in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Rick. Before I do, just a few words on kind of our dynamic for this evening. If you have any recipe questions at all, or just questions for Rick, please feel free to shoot a note in the chat, and I'll be kind of working through those. I might not actually jump right into that moment, whatever Rick is doing in that moment. I'll kind of let him ask me when he's ready for a question, and I'll pose it, but I'll make sure we get through everything. And we'll try to leave questions, additional questions toward the end for kind of Q&A if you want to kind of jump in and ask questions directly. So just make sure you've got those questions lined up. And then last but not least, I mentioned this before, but we're recording this class right now. So we'll definitely circulate this back to everybody who's here, and then folks who couldn't attend who did buy the bundle so that you could follow along at home. But without further ado, Rick, thanks so much. Thanks for doing this today.
No, thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for not only being here tonight, but then also obviously buying the book and buying Sassy. It means absolutely so much to me. I hope you've enjoyed the book. And I am also going to apologize for this bleak gray colorless kitchen. When we had actually talked about doing this class, I had thought that my new kitchen would be ready, but foolish me for being optimistic, but my designers and my architect and contractors tell me that definitely by February 5th, possibly a week earlier, I'll be back in the house. So anyway, here I am. I am going to start the chicken first and then just talk to you a little bit more. I made a swap of I made a mole amarillo last night. And because I'm in an Airbnb kitchen, I kind of wanted to see how the kitchen performs. This stove kind of sucks. It doesn't get very hot very quickly. So I'm going to put the chicken on now just so that it can have time to get brown. But I will continue to talk and tell you that first I want to ask, is anybody actually cooking along, or is everybody just hanging out, watching, having a cocktail? Is anybody, I don't know if maybe there's a way to put it in the chat, if anybody's cooking along, because if anybody's cooking along, I definitely want to make sure that if you have a question that I get to answer your question.
I know, Otis.
Is that a person cooking along?
Yes, we are cooking.
Yay, okay, great. So you probably don't need to start your chicken this early. Like I said, I'm just doing it because this burner is very, very slow. But okay, so I'm gonna make for you one of my favorite recipes, and it's funny because I made it last night, and I was like, why am I not making this more often? It's incredibly delicious. It's a lot different than other moles that I think people are more familiar with, like a mole negro, mole coloradito. It is more this dish is more like a stew. It's got vegetables in it. It's got chicken in it. It's yellow, which is also a little bit different. It's from Oaxaca. It's one of the 7 moles in Oaxaca. I really love it because it's a little bit easier than, say, a mole negro. And it's really hearty and delicious. And I think it's great for this particular time of year when it's a little bit cold or a lot cold, depending on where you are. It's a little cold here in Mazatlan, nothing like the US at the moment, but I think it's a really great winter dish. So with that, now that I have my chicken going, in the recipe, I talk about making the masa first. So that's what we're gonna do. And I am using, get ready for it. I had my choice of all the colors that Masienda makes. And so I decided that I wanted to make red. I really love the flavor. To me, Maíz Rojo has a little bit more nuttiness and at times can be a little bit sweeter than some of the other varieties, and I really like that. And in this dish, if you are fortunate enough to have found chochoyotes Amarillo, which is the chili that's commonly used to make mole amarillo in Oaxaca, you will actually get a really nice yellow colored mole at the end. It's a little bit difficult to find. I mean, frankly, it's difficult for me to get. I actually had to order it. So I don't expect anybody to have specially ordered this, but just know that that's what's typically used. You can definitely use any other type of dried chili. Just make sure you use the same gram amount that I use, or the weight. Weight of the chilies is pretty important because the chilies act as a thickener to the sauce. And so a lot of times I'll get asked, well, why is my sauce, really thin, or why is it really, really thick? And it's because chilies vary in size. And so you can see, like, this is a chochoyote, and this is a chochoyote. And so if I told you in my recipe to just use 3, you might use 3 of these and have a really thin sauce, or you might use 3 of these and have a really thick sauce. But if I tell you to use 18 grams, then, it might, in this case, I'm actually using 5 of them, and that equals a little over 18 grams. You're going to get as close to the result that I got. You don't need a scale, certainly, but, like a lot of times if I am without a scale, I'll just weigh things at the grocery store, just like throw them in a little, basket at the grocery store, and just kind of get a rough estimate of what things weigh and buy that amount. And then you'll get as close to the recipe as I get. Okay. I also just love weighing everything because it just takes the guesswork out of everything. So I am going to, this is 1 cup of the masa harina, which is about 120 grams. And in the book, I say that you can use, or I say to use water. Totally use water, totally fine. I made a big fresh pot of chicken stock, and it's hot and simmering, so I'm using that. I'm also using really delicious lard. There's a really great puesto here in Mazatlan in the Mercado. There's a couple that I swear they have the best lard that I've ever eaten, certainly in Mazatlan, maybe in all of Mexico. And so they're my favorite lard purveyors. So that's where I get my lard. And then a 1/4 teaspoon of salt into the masa harina. It is a pinch for me. And now I'm just going to mix this up. In the recipe, I call for a wait time. And I like to do that because oftentimes, depending on the grind, depending on the age of the masa harina, depending on the color, it's going to have a different absorption rate of the water. And so when you first mix it together, it might be a little bit wet. And then as it sits, it will start to firm up, and the grains of the maize will absorb the moisture, and you'll get a really nice, soft, pliable dough. And so like this, for example, you can see it's sticking to my fingers. And after about half an hour of sitting, it is going to be the perfect consistency to make the chochoyotes or tamales or sopes or whatever delicious corn product you want to make. All right, so I'm just going to work this until it comes together. And in this recipe, you can use whatever color of corn masa that you like or that you have access to. And this is what it should look like when you're done mixing. I don't need to like go crazy with the mixing. I just need it to come together. And then I'm just going to let that sit. I'm going to cover it with a clean kitchen towel and then let that sit. And then in 30 minutes, it will be ready to go. And then I'm going to look at my chicken and I'll take my first question.
So Rick, we don't have any questions yet about the
Okay.
recipe, but we did have one pressing question, which I second, which is when is it borderline salty starting up again? And that's from Ginger.
It's probably going to be a few months just because I've literally been living in an Airbnb, in several Airbnbs for the last 5 months. So I just want to get back to my house before I start recording again. So hopefully I will be back in another 2 weeks and then we'll set the time sometime after that.
Josh is hoping we get an episode or two in the kitchen, the new kitchen.
Oh, 100%. No, I've actually been started planning out my my first meal in the kitchen. Like, what am I going to make? And so I'm definitely going to record that and post that on social. So stay tuned.
Fun. Any teasers as to what that's going to be? Maybe mole amarillo?
No, actually, it's going to be. I mean, I'll just tell you. Actually, it is going to be an Italian recipe. This is like a really weird story. Not weird, but like sort of weird. It'll kind of give you an insight into my personality as a child and why I do what I do now. So while I'm telling that story, I'm going to take the stem and the seeds out of the chiles. So when I was little, or my mom bought in the 60s, the Time Life cookbooks of the world. It's like an encyclopedia of cookbooks, and each volume is a different country, and they were really beautiful. And I think, for the time, like, I mean, she bought them in the 60s. It was pretty crazy because, like, obviously, there was no internet. It wasn't like mainstream consumers weren't global. There wasn't a broad understanding of a lot of different cuisine from a lot of different countries. And so the fact that they even existed and Time Life did a really great job of going around the world and exploring the cuisine and documenting through photographs and recipes. Anyway, so she bought these cookbooks, and as a child, I was obsessed with them, and in particular, the Italian cookbook. And one day, I think it was in junior high, I decided that I was going to make cannellonis Florentine for lunch for me and my brother. My brother was probably about 6. And so I had it all planned out. And this recipe, it was like homemade pasta and a filling of ground beef and spinach and Parmesan, a bechamel, a marinara sauce, and so, yeah, I thought I could get all this done in 4 or 5 hours and have a nice lunch. I was wrong. And I remember distinctly there was a line about the pasta. I mean, obviously I've never made pasta in my entire life. And there was a line about how do you know the pasta's ready it's been rolled out enough, or it's thin enough to cut and then cook. And in the instructions, it said you have to lift the sheet of pasta and pass your hand behind the sheet and be able to see your hand, like the shadow of your hand through the pasta. And so, here I am, this little kid, no pasta machine. It's like my mom's like little tortilla rolling pin. And, and I'm like this, and I'm just rolling it up. And my arms hurt, my shoulders hurt. And anyway, at 5 o'clock or 5:30, when my mother got home, the kitchen was an absolute disaster. There was, tomato sauce everywhere. My brother was covered in flour, and I'm practically in tears. And she's like, "Oh my God, what what have you done? And she tasted everything, and then she's like, okay, well, I mean, like all the sauces, all the filling, all the pasta had been cooked. I just hadn't assembled and baked it. So she helped me assemble and bake it. And it was one of the best things that I had ever made. And probably, I mean, it's been years since I've made it, but it became a tradition in the family. Like once a year, I would make this dish for everybody. And I don't know, I just thought it was like it would be a fitting way to break in and christen my new kitchen, just to make this again. So I think that's what will be my first christening dish in the new kitchen.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Rick.
Yeah.
We have a quick recipe question from Betsy. When should we start browning the chicken? I know you touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but if you want to jump back into it.
I mean, you can throw it in now. It depends, I guess, if your vegetables are prepped. So the chicken should take around 6 to 8 minutes, depending on your stove. You don't need it to be like super brown, because like the darker your chicken gets, the more color you're going to give your mole. And so, just like a light golden brown, I think it's nice. It'll add flavor. It'll also render some of the chicken fat. And I think it'll just be a lot better. So like, I'll show you where I'm at now. This is like after telling a long story, I'm just barely getting to golden brown color. So that's why I started so early. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the chilies now. So I just dropped my clean chilies in. I'm going to get up here and show you. So this is what they look like. Is anybody using chihuahuas? If you are,
chat.
Sure.
I think I saw at least one person share their chihuahuas earlier.
Oh, nice. Okay, great. So this is after about probably about 30 minutes sitting in the hot broth. You can see they're like really soft and pliable. This is what you want. By putting them in the hot water, they're rehydrating, but then also skin gets really soft and tender. It'll make it easier for your blender to pulverize them, and it will also unlock a lot of their flavor. My screen. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to start working on the vegetables. All right. So I'm just going to rough chop the onion. So we're going to blend everything at the end. So you don't have to really go crazy with the chopping. The thing that I want to do when I chop these vegetables for something that I'm going to blend is I just want to get enough surface area so that they'll get a little bit of color and they'll get tender. Because as they cook, they're going to release their liquid, and you'll get a little bit of browning on the bottom of the pan, and that comes from like all the sugars that are present in the vegetables, which I think is important anytime you cook, really. But particularly in this dish, you don't want to really taste raw onion. You want to taste the sweetness of the onion. And you can finely grate your garlic, or you can just give it a little rough chop. Again, same sort of thing. And how are we doing with the folks that are cooking along?
We had one question come in, one funny story, which is that the chiles that Ginger brought back from Oaxaca, she had to put them immediately in her freezer because she had a hatch of moths upon her return, which I would say it means they're very fresh, Ginger. I think it's a good sign, but
yeah,
good on the freezer.
Good, very good call for the freezer. And I will show you. I did the exact same thing. These are my chochoyotes. I actually bought like half a kilo of red, yellow, and black because I really love the chihuahuas. But like I said, I have to like order them from Oaxaca. So when I order them, I just order a big batch, and then if you throw them in the freezer, they'll last longer. You don't even normally I would put them in like a freezer bag, but like they already came in like shopping bags, and I just threw them in there. But that's a really great way to store them. Otherwise, what I typically do is I have OXO, and like other brands make these too, but I really like the OXO. I think I have them. Yeah, these little airtight containers that have a pop-up lid. I put all my herbs, and I buy the big ones for flour, sugar, and dried chilies. And that's how I normally store them. I usually go through like anchos, guajillos, pasillas, chile de árbol, morritas. I go through pretty quickly. So those I'll just like put in those containers, and they'll stay fresh for a really long time. The chihuahuas that I don't use all that often, I'll put in the freezer, and they'll last for 6 months, almost a year.
And Rick, for the
Okay.
folks who don't have the recipe in front of them, you would recommend as a substitute, if you can't find chihuahuas, guajillo or
Guajillo, yeah. Guajillo is going to give you a little bit more of a red color, but I think it's a comparable substitute. Guajillos are a little bit earthier; they're a little less spicy. The chihuahuas can be a little spicy, but I really like that, and also like they're going to give you that really nice color that I love. Okay. In the recipe, I also called for either chile caribe, chile hierro. You can use wax peppers as well. You probably just want to find something that's either very light green or yellow color. These happen to be the chile caribes. They have a little nice spice. They're sweet like a bell pepper, and they have like sort of a thicker flesh, but they do have a little bit of a bite, which I like. I like roasting them as well. They're really great for roasting. They're really great for stuffing as well. In the northern part of the country, there's a town called Mexicali in Baja California, and there's a very large Chinese Mexican population, and one of the dishes that's very popular there are stuffing these with either like a Chinese style fried rice, or with different meats, and they're really delicious. So I like those a lot. But if you can't find these, you could even use a Cubanelle pepper, or a yellow bell pepper. All right, and all I'm doing here is I'm just cutting them in half and taking the seeds out, and then I'll just give them a little bit of a rough chop. And then all my veg are going to be ready, and then I think my chicken should be done, and I can then throw that in. All right. That's done. And then I'm using 2 tomatillos. These are pretty large, and they're a little bit over the weight that I have in the book, but tomatillos, again, it's one of those things that you should look at the weight in the book and just see about how much I use, because again, they vary in size depending on the year and what grocery store you're in. And the thing is that they're very acidic. And so there are times where I've used, the recipe will call for 4, I use 4, and it's like super acidic, but because I had very large tomatillos. So it's one of those things just to keep in mind when you're cooking with them. I really love them because they add like such a punch of brightness to your foods. And I think particularly in this dish, you've got a lot of richness from the chicken, you have a lot of earthiness from the vegetables, and then you have like the heartiness from the chochoyotes, which are masa dumplings. And you kind of need something that's going to kind of punch through all of that richness. And so, they kind of act almost as like the squeeze of lime at the table. So like, you're really not going to need a squeeze of lime in this dish because you've got the tomatillos in there. Okay, I'm pulling my chicken. I have a nice golden color, and I've got some really beautiful brown bits on the bottom of the pan. So let me just show you what the chicken looks like. So we're nice pale golden brown. And then I am just going to throw all the veg in here. So I've got the garlic, the onion, the chile caribes, the tomatillos, And then I've got all my spices and salt. So in the book, I have 18 grams of salt. I use sea salt. I live by the sea. I love sea salt. You can use kosher. If you're using Morton's, well, if you're using kosher salt, one of the things that's important to note, Morton's kosher salt is more dense than diamond crystal. And so I give you the volume amount for the diamond crystal, sorry, for Morton's, but if you're using diamond crystal, it's actually almost twice as much. So basically half a teaspoon of Morton's is the equivalent of about a full teaspoon of diamond. So that's why another reason why I like to use weights of things, because then, you know, there's no guesswork. I'm using Mexican oregano, which is a little bit more floral and less bitter. I'm using whole peppercorns, a little bit of cumin, allspice berries, whole, and 1 clove. I've got some bay leaves. I love that combination of allspice and clove, and it exists in many different dishes throughout the country, particularly the South and the Gulf. Allspice actually grows in Veracruz and Tabasco. I was staying at a hotel. I was visiting farms in Tabasco, and one morning I woke up and they were harvesting the allspice berries on this mountain, and the wind was like blowing down off the mountain, and I had my windows open in the hotel room, and the smell of the allspice berries coming off the mountain was insane. It was so incredible. Like, to be honest, I actually thought that someone was smoking a clove cigarette in my room. I was like, wait, what is happening? But it was just like this strong, like, you know, it just smelled like Christmas. And, you know, like, I think I had always had this impression of allspice being that spice in your cabinet that just sits there for years and it tastes like dust, because, you know, no one ever calls for it. And then after that moment, I was like, nope, I'm going to start using allspice and everything. And I really like it a lot as, you know, a back note to a lot of Mexican guisos and stews. And I, you know, like, you don't use that much. Like in this case, for a mole, you're just using 4 berries, but it adds so much depth of flavor. So I really like that a lot. And then the salt I'm adding along with all of the vegetables. And I do this in basically anything I cook. Anytime I saute vegetables, I always put the salt in with the vegetables at the very beginning. What that does is the salt draws out all of the liquid out of the vegetables, and you evaporate that really quickly, much quicker than if you just throw the vegetables in without the salt. What that does is once the water is evaporated, you're left with the sugars and like the essence of the vegetable, and you'll start to get nice caramelization and browning. And I think it just like, it gives you a better sauteed product. You get better concentration of flavors and better caramelization. And then the other thing that I am going to add, and I apologize, I have a hoja santa plant. So hoja santa is an herb that is very widely used in the southern part of Mexico and Oaxaca and Chiapas and other places. It is in the southern part of the United States. It's called a root beer plant. It has beautiful circular leaves. It grows really big. My mom actually grew it as a more of a hedge. She never really cooked with it, but it you know, it grows very, very quickly in warm climates. In Oaxaca, they use it in a lot of moles, in soups and stews. A lot of times they will press the leaf into a tortilla. And so you'll have a tortilla that is, you know, just regular, like has the one masa side, and then you have like the full leaf on the other side. It's also used commonly in tamales. So you'll have a banana leaf, you'll spread your masa, you put a leaf of hoja santa down, and then a little bit of chicken and a little bit of a mole or a sauce over top. So my poor hoja santa plant in my house is covered in concrete. So it's still alive and it's thriving, but I didn't want to like pull a leaf full of concrete off. So I'm using dried today, but I'm going to throw these in. And I also have a tostada. This is one that I made. A lot of times, I mean, I always have tortillas in the house, and after the corn tortillas start to get a little old, I'll either fry them and make fried tostadas or totopos, or if I want to bake tostada, literally you just put your skillet or your griddle on medium-low heat, throw the tortillas down, and then after about 10 minutes, they get like really nice and crispy. And they hold their crisp. I made this one last night and it's still like super crispy. And this tostada is going to give you not only flavor, but it's also going to help thicken the sauce. Okay, I'm gonna tidy up a little bit and I will take another question.
Ashley asked if toasting the herbs is an option for this dish, or would you just throw the overall flavor off with that? And hoja santa especially, I'm curious if you would treat that at all or just throw it in fresh.
No, so the thing about this particular dish, like if I'm doing a darker mole, I definitely am going to toast the chilies and I'm going to toast the herbs. In this one, because I really want to preserve the yellow color, I'm just more cautious about like going too far in, like I don't want to brown my vegetables. I want to cook them until they're tender. You can definitely toast the herbs and it's not going to add, it's not going to add that much color to it. But I also, for ease of use for this particular recipe, I like the idea that you just throw everything in the pot and then just let it all cook down. You are going to get like the herbs and the spices as they like sit on the bottom of the pan are going to get a little bit of flavor. You're going to wake up all of the essential oils in all of them. But a lot of times, like if you're trying to toast oregano, for example, it takes literally like 2 seconds and then it starts to burn. But definitely try it. I mean, this is one of those recipes where actually, I mean, all of the recipes in the book, and this is, we talked a little bit about this, Jorge, you and I, before we started, like I hate the word authentic because for a number of reasons, but I feel like in the United States, marketers, particularly publishers, started using this word when selling books of different cultures, different countries. And what happened is that they and we in media and publishing have trained consumers to believe that there is one correct way to make a dish, right? We say that this book is the most authentic book, or this recipe is the most authentic recipe out there. Therefore, that means that everything else is not authentic and not real, and you shouldn't be cooking from those books. You should be cooking from this one. And that's not true. Like, and that's also why I wanted to research and drive across Mexico to try all this food, because, like, I wondered, like, is that true? Like, is there like one way to make a mole negro, or, pan de cazón, or ulichi? And the answer is no. Like every household in Mexico has their own version. Every cook has their own version. Every city has their own version. And they make food based on what they like, what's available, what they can afford. And I think that's what's great about cooking. And the thing is that that's exactly the same way that Americans cook, right? Like there's not one way to make brisket in Texas. There's not one way to make ribs in St. Louis. Every cook in those areas has their version, their particular rub, their particular sauce or mop. And, and so I think you do a disservice when you say something is authentic. So these recipes are authentic to me. This is the way I like to cook. These are the way that I like these dishes, but I also want you guys to feel like you can play around with the recipe. Like I was thinking today, like, okay, next time I make this dish, I'm gonna like up the amount of the chili chihuahuas because I like that flavor. And even if it gets a little bit like darker, like really dark yellow and almost orange, that's fine because I like that flavor and whatever, it's my recipe, so who cares? But like have fun with it. I mean, that's what makes cooking fun, is that, if you use the recipe as just a guide, and you're like, well, I'm going to add a little more of this, or I don't like that thing, I'm going to add this thing, and just have fun. And if you use the things that you like, instead of what is in the written recipe, chances are you're probably going to like it even more because you're going to use things that you like the flavor of. So that's my little take on authenticity.
Rick, sorry to interrupt. Tomatillos, are those quote unquote authentic, or is that your contribution to this recipe? Because I love the acidity that comes from tomatillos, and it's one of the reasons why it's not, mole amarillo has not traditionally been my favorite of all the moles.
Yeah.
I love that touch to it.
No, you do find tomatillos in mole amarillo in different places. Sometimes underripe tomatoes are used.
Right.
I think out of all the states in the country, Oaxaca has the biggest variety of tomatoes that I've seen in tomatillos. So there are like tiny little purple ones, there are like larger green ones. I feel like the bounty of what is cultivated and harvested in Oaxaca is probably greater, than other places. They also, the markets, I saw a lot more variety of herbs as well. And that's not to say that like they don't exist in other places, but I think, like for example, Sinaloa, where I live, is a big agricultural state, but there are very specific varieties of things that everybody uses and those are the staple crops that are typically grown. Whereas I think in Oaxaca, there's just greater variety. And so, different things can be used in this dish that can give you that acidity. I did see people using tomatillos. Other people are using other things that, are difficult for me to access, which I then assume that most Americans probably couldn't access them either.
Right.
One funny thing I did see, there's a lot of basil in Oaxaca. And I kept asking people at the mercado, like, what do people use basil for? Like, I feel like I've never tasted basil in any Oaxacan food that I've eaten. And that's because the majority of the basil, which is grown, like it's allowed to mature and then it's harvested as like a full plant. Like they literally just like pull the whole thing out of the ground and then they sell like this plant, but like with all the dirt removed from the roots. And I was like, so what is it that you do with this? And they're like, oh, this is what we used to clean. Like it's like a duster. Wow. And so you dust your house with this, and then your whole house smells like basil. And it's like, which is really kind of cool. But I was like, oh, okay. I
never knew that.
Yeah. So I'm sure like some, there are people that probably cook with it, but that seemed to be the majority of the responses that I got at the market when I was there.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So I am getting good and toasty. My vegetables are nice and soft, which I'm very happy about. Okay. I am going to move this. I have my swap of the mole amarillo, which I made yesterday. It's very hot, so I'm going to take it off the stove. And I am ready to add my stock. So I'm going to just go in and add my hot stock to the pot. So this is 3 cups of chicken stock. If you don't have chicken stock, or fresh chicken stock, you can obviously use box stock. Also a note on, just meat versus vegetarian. There's actually quite a lot of vegetarian food or plant-forward food in Mexico. A lot of the animals that we associate in Mexican cuisine actually came from the Europeans. It didn't exist here. So like cows and pigs didn't exist in Mexico before the Europeans brought them over. And so the diet was much more plant forward. And so there are places in Mexico that, almost entirely just use nuts, seeds, flowers, leaves, roots, fruits and vegetables in the cuisine. And then, like obviously if you live near water, then fish, sometimes iguanas and reptiles, wild turkeys, some other fowl. But, for a lot of people, it was a very plant-based diet. And so what I tell people in regards to that, because I love produce, is any one of the recipes in the book are in my mind very easily converted into a plant-based meal. I'm going to talk about this, which is a chayote, which I love. This is very common in Mexican cuisine. It has the flavor of, it's sort of like a pumpkin, but less hard and less dense. It's got a little bit of a sweetness to the flesh. It also kind of reminds me of like, it has the crispness of a pear, a little bit of, kind of zucchini notes. It's just a really, really fun vegetable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel it, and I could not find my vegetable peeler when I went home because my kitchen is in boxes. So I'm just going to use a paring knife. But anyway, back to the vegetarian. So if you, for example, you wanted to make this dish, but make it plant forward, you could definitely make it with tofu, with tempeh. You could use, I would probably use a vegetable. So I would probably go for either something like, I would probably use mushrooms. I just love mushrooms. If you get either creminis, or you could use, I think shiitakes would be really great. Any kind of wild mushroom, or even just like white button mushrooms would be totally great. Just sear them until you get some nice color. I would probably leave them whole or cut them in half if they were like on the larger side. And then just treat them in the same way that I'm treating the chicken. Just like get your color, get them soft and tender, and then let them stew at the end, or as I'm doing now. I think that would be completely delicious. But if there are any big root vegetables that you like, then you could totally use that. I think I love sweet things, so a really nice white sweet potato would be delicious in this as well. Or you could have a medley of roasted vegetables. You can leave the you can make the recipe as is without chicken, and then just roast some vegetables and serve it with that. So that's, and all of the recipes in the book, I think all that you really need to do is think about the cook time for the vegetable that you're using. If you're using something that is going to cook really quickly, then obviously, if I call for a 2-hour simmer in a chili sauce, don't do that. But even using some greens, like I think using collard greens, which I've done before, I've basically made like a guiso for a birria, but used collards because they take a really long time. And then at the end, you have like this really nice kind of stewed collard situation, which is great in tacos. And you also get that really nice consomme as well. All right, so that is good. Much easier and much quicker if you have a vegetable peeler. All right.
And do you always peel the chayote?
Sorry?
You always peel them?
It depends. Like I feel like in this dish, it's you notice the peel when you eat it in this dish, because I've tried it before. And it's a mouthfeel thing. There are nutrients in it that obviously you are removing by peeling it. So if that is something that is important to you, then definitely don't peel it. I am going to take the pit out, and right. But you can use, if you can't find the chayote, you can just use more squash, use another hard vegetable that you like. I think it's really nice now. I actually like parsnips and turnips a lot. So if I was in the US and had access to those vegetables and I couldn't find chayote, I would probably use those. And then I like an oblique cut, which is just a sort of side to side cut. I like more sort of organic-y looking shapes. When I worked in restaurants, the chef would always say, like, cut things so that people know what it is that they're eating. When you cut things too uniformly, too much in where you lose the shape of the vegetable, you kind of lose what it is that you're eating. So that has always stuck with me. All right. And do I have another question out there?
Yes, well, that one was from Ginger about peeling. And then this one might be a little bit longer, so we can maybe break this up in phases. But Kentucky Cooks, given the amount of variation possible, what is the distinguishing feature that separates different types of mole? You mentioned 7 moles, different moles in Oaxaca alone. Is it the chiles? Is it the color spice combo? What is sort of the unifying theme of those 7?
It's the chiles, but again, if you don't have access to them, the thing about the Oaxacan chiles is that they grow in a very specific location in the state, and it's very difficult to get them elsewhere. They're difficult to cultivate in other parts of Mexico, and so obviously then certainly it's going to be difficult to cultivate them in other parts of the world or in the US. And so what is important, I think, in the moles is the amount of chile that you use. So in this one, for example, you're using both the chihuacle amarillo and also the fresh either Caribe or Hierro chiles. And that combination is important. And the color of this particular mole is important. In a chile or in a mole negro, you are cooking all of the ingredients or most of the ingredients until they are completely charred and black. And then you're resuscitating them in a way. So you're soaking them and partially cooking them to remove the bitterness, to remove the acridness and the smokiness. And then you reconstitute them, and then they sort of magically regain their flavor of chile. But in that case, it's really about, then that mole, it's the method of preparation, it's the color, making sure you get that color, but then also making sure that you're removing all of those bitter and unpleasant flavors out of that. And I think the same is true for like the other color, like the mole verde. Obviously, it's green. That is, it can be made either using a variety of like fresh and cooked herbs and vegetables and chiles. But there's always, in a mole, there's always chiles present, or it's really not a mole. There's another sort of mother sauce in Mexico called a pipián. And a pipián, it has very similar ingredients to a mole. So spices, nuts, seeds, dried chiles, sometimes fresh chiles. But what distinguishes it, makes it a pipián and not a mole, is the ratio of nuts to chiles or seeds to chiles. So in a pipián, you have more nuts and seeds than you do chiles. And so it's almost like a creamier sauce because you're using the ground chilies, the ground nuts and seeds. In the case of a mole, it's a much more chile forward flavor. And so the chiles are dominant. And so like the sesame seeds or peanuts or other nuts that exist in those moles are more of like a background note. So does that answer the question?
Kentucky Cooks. I think that covered it for me for sure.
So I think, and what happens, and this again, goes back to the idea of like the authenticity. It's like, if you don't have access to Oaxacan or chihuahuas, for example, like, then are you really making mole amarillo? Well, like I think you are, and maybe, but I'm not the mole police, so I mean, who knows? But like I have a very good friend, Fermin Nunez in Austin. And so he has a couple of restaurants, Suerte, and then now a seafood restaurant. And one of the things that I think this gives me a lot of inspiration, and and what he did. So when I met him and he opened Suerte, he was like, I wanted to have moles on my menu, but I didn't want to have to import all of these ingredients from Mexico. So he's from Sonora, and he likes, that's where he grew up, and he grew up with that food, but he wanted to bring it into Central Texas. And so he's like, so I'm not going to make my moles with plantains and things that don't grow here. Instead, I'm going to use pecans and peaches because those are local ingredients from Central Texas. And so, like, is it an authentic mole? I don't know, but it's a really damn tasty mole, you know, and it's made with ingredients that he gets that are fresh and delicious, you know, from local farmers. And I don't know, to me, that's what Mexican cooks do. They're not, you know, ordering things and buying things from far away. They're using the things that grow locally. And I think when you use foods that grow locally, your food just tastes better, and you get that beautiful terroir of where you live. And then if you serve it with, you know, like if your corn and your beans and your chiles all grow in the soil around, you know, around where you live, and then you serve your meal with a beautiful mezcal with agave that comes from, you know, your area, then you've got like this really, really beautiful meal that is joined together by the mineral content and the terroir in your soil. So that's how I like to cook and think about food. Okay, I am going to make my dough. Okay, so I have my masa, and can I get a time check?
We are at 4 minutes to the hour.
Okay, great. So this is looking really good. I am going to blend this up so you know what this looks like. So this is going to be a little bit out of order, but I think it's important just to kind of see what kind of consistency we're looking for. And also because I get this question a lot. Like, do I need special equipment for your book? The answer is no. And B, when I'm making a mole, do I need, you know, a crazy Vitamix or some, you know, crazy, ridiculously expensive blender? The answer is no. I will say though, when I was developing the recipes for this book, I made the mole. I made a mole negro, and I burned out the blender in my Airbnb. But it was like an Airbnb blender. It was very old and not very great, obviously. I bought my host, a new blender, but pretty much any blender is going to give you a good result if you've cooked and soaked your chilies and all of your ingredients, you know, to the proper amount of time. So everything just should be really, really tender. Some blenders like this one, this is my Airbnb blender. I'm sure that like the only thing that's ever been used for is probably making drinks or smoothies. And now, you know, we're making a mole amarillo. But it worked really well. So so you don't need a crazy blender. I also know I was interviewed for a story about blenders about a year ago, and the person took the recipes from the book and used bullets to make it. And so I also know that the moles can be made in bullets. So if you have a bullet, if you don't trust your blender, you don't have a blender, you can also use that as well. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully put these hot ingredients into the blender. If you're unsure, if you haven't made mole or pureed a sauce in your blender, you may want to do this in batches. I've only made the mole once in this blender, but I know that if I do it in little bits at a time, it's going to work. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, I'm going to add my soaked chilies and the cooking liquid. Right. And I always start low. Make sure that you keep your hand over the top, and it's probably safer if you, just for safety, if you keep a towel over the top in case anything splashes back. And then I'm going to just increase the speed. So I've kind of broken everything up a little bit. Now we'll give it a little bit more gas. And then I'm just going to let it go for about 60 seconds. And in that time, everything will be nice and pulverized. So, oh, it smells so good. So you can see we've got a really nice yellow color. It's not super thick. Let me get a little bit more. This is a little bit thick because I haven't like blended all of it, but this is kind of what you're going for. This one has maybe, it's not as smooth. If I was using my Vitamix at home, I'm going to get like a really, really silky smooth texture. But I'm not really worried. I mean, the thing is like nobody has, in Mexico, nobody has like those crazy blenders. And honestly, like a lot of people in Oaxaca, when they make moles, they're grinding things on a matete, which is it's a large piece of volcanic rock, and it's like a flat mortar and pestle, and so it's going to be a little bit coarser, and it's fine. It's fine. Everything is going to be really, really delicious because all the same flavors are in there. It's just going to be a matter of, is it perfectly silky smooth, or is it very nearly smooth? You could. Some people have told me that they've had success making this with a stick blender. If that's all you have, definitely use that. In a pinch, when I was at a friend's house who didn't have a blender and I didn't know that, and so we did it in a food processor. That was a little bit chunky, but it still worked. So again, just use what you have. Okay, I'm going to do the rest of this, and then do I have another question?
We have a few. One note too is if you find that it's too thin, do you ever use Masienda as a thickener for moles if it's kind of gotten a little too thin of a consistency?
I mean, I wouldn't use the raw Masarina. I would probably just put in, another tostada or like another tortilla. Right. And some recipes like the mole negro, the coloradito use either cookies. Sometimes they use animal crackers, or there are some polvorones that are yellow. Those are also used at times. So, I would probably opt for that. I think the thing if you put Masarina in there, it's going to clump unless you either sift it and then whisk in, or unless you blend it. So I think I would either use something that's already been cooked like a tortilla.
Yeah. Okay. And more pressing than that question, if you were a chile pepper, what chile would you be, Rick?
Oh my God. Ooh, I think, wow, that's hard. Okay. I'm going to blend it in.
Take a second.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if I've ever seen a chile. I don't think I have. I think I would probably like to be an habanero. I really, really love habaneros a lot. I love the spice, but I also really, really love the kick, I think a lot of people are afraid of them, and I'll give you a tip for the habaneros. Let me just mix these two together. So you can see this is much paler because all of the chilies were in the first batch. And so now when I mix this all together, we will get a much more yellow color. I always love this moment. This is actually one of my favorite moments in this recipe, because it's that moment where you're like, okay, this guy said this was a mole amarillo, but is it really going to be yellow? And then you mix your two batches of the puree together, and voila, it is yellow. I'm gonna pour it in my book. All right, let me do this. All right, there. So that. Oh. Let's see there. I think it's just like such a really, really pretty color. And yeah, there's some like pieces of oregano which my blender couldn't handle, but you know what? That's totally fine. Also, because we're serving it more like soup style, then I don't think it's really going to be that big of a deal. Also, if any of your friends complain that your sauce isn't completely silky smooth, I think you should consider getting new friends. How's that? Okay, so now going to put everything back in the pot. I'm going to add my veg, and then we will cook this and simmer that. And then when that has been nicely simmered and the vegetables are tender, then it's time to put the chochoyotes. So now I'm going to get my masa, and let's see, I forgot how big of a piece I said to get. All right. All right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a little piece of the dough. For those that are cooking along, how's everybody going? Or how's it going for everyone? Do you have any questions from them?
No new questions coming in yet. One that I'm saving for the end, which is around Tlayula press. But
Okay.
I'd say, kind of tying this together. I mean, like I'm thinking about my mole amarillo experiences, and typically, like there's a richness to it that I'm like really blown away by just leveling up the amount of tomatillo, if that's something that you have found, because it's typically like there can be really rich chicken stock, and if you're not used to that flavor, it can kind of be a lot. So that, and also just the play with the hoja santa, I think what is so beautiful and what does really cut that is that the presence of that fresh, the fresh leaf. So just again, kind of using what you've got to make to compensate for what that dish should sort of ultimately feel like for you, which is awesome. I'm still thinking about that. So thank you for that.
No. I mean, I think, one of the things that I think exists in pretty much all of Mexican cuisine is this idea of balance. And I used to think, before I wrote the book and before I'd really traveled through different parts of the country, I think in the US as a recipe developer, you're trying to achieve balance in every dish. And in Mexico, that is not the case. You don't need balance in each dish or each component. You achieve balance in the total plate. And so, when you make a taco, for example, right? Like you have a guiso that might be creamy, it might be slightly acidic, it could be sweet, it could be chocolatey, and then you're going to have a salsa that is fresh, or maybe it's toasted, or maybe it's charred. You might have a salsa macha, which is a little bit oil based. You might have a little bit of chopped. You're probably definitely going to have chopped onion and chopped cilantro. You're going to have a squeeze of lime. You might have chopped cabbage. And those are all going to give you textural elements that the main entree or the main ingredient is not going to give you. And I think that, a lot of people, like they'll build a taco and it just seems like flat or seems, incomplete. And it's because you're supposed to use all those condiments that are on the table. Like when you go to a taqueria or when you go to a Mexican restaurant, there's going to be at least 2 salsas, maybe more. There's going to be dried herbs. There's going to be fresh herbs. There are always going to be limes on the table. And, oftentimes if you're new to it, then it can seem overwhelming. But, I think that's what makes it really beautiful, is that every bite is a little bit different. Every taco is a little bit different, every torta, because you've got so many different layers of flavor. And that guiso doesn't need to be, perfectly balanced, because you're going to put a squeeze of lime on it. You're going to add something crunchy. You're going to add something cool to soften the heat of it. So yeah. And I think in this particular dish, you get within the dish, there are a lot of layers of flavor. But then, for example, if you make, which I love to do, and I wrote this deliberately this way, I wanted to include this recipe because I love mole amarillo, but also the empanadas de mole amarillo are very common in Oaxaca. And I was visiting a ceramicist in Oaxaca, and he was showing me his kiln, and he was showing me the different kinds of clay that he uses. to produce his work, and you know, he was a third generation ceramicist in his family, and you know, so I ended up staying there for a couple of hours, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm like so hungry. And he's like, there is literally like half a block down the street, there's a puesto, and they serve the best empanadas de mole amarillo. And sure enough, I went there and they were insanely delicious. And so, you know, and it was one of those moments that as soon as I took the first bite, I was like, well, this is going in the book. And one of the questions that I often get, you know, particularly with moles, is that you spend a lot of time making this thing and then you don't eat it all in the first day. And so what do you do with the leftovers? I like to make molequiles, which is basically a chilequile, but with leftover mole. And so, but then with the mole amarillo, definitely, I really love making the empanadas. It's so good, so satisfying. And I also find that what ends up happening is that I eat all the chochoyotes, and that, which reminds me, so what I've done is I've just divided up the dough into these cute little balls. And then all you have to do is just gently press down with your thumb. It's like you're making a little thumbprint. And it's a little divot that's going to hold on to and catch a lot of the delicious mole. It'll also help it cook more evenly because everything is basically going to be the same thickness, but you'll have like this really nice shape to it. So I've got all my little cute dumplings ready to go now. And I'm going to just carefully drop them on the top of the simmered mole that I made yesterday. The one that I just made has a little bit of cook time, but the magic of video classes, we have one already made. So that's what they look like. And I'm just going to drop them in.
And Rick, we've got about a little less than 20 minutes left, just as a heads up.
Great. So these are going to take about, what I think I wrote 12 minutes in the book, thereabout, and then we're going to do my cover. I'm going to reduce the heat. Okay. And do I have another question out there?
We have a few. You asked earlier if
Okay.
some folks were following along. Betsy, just as a fun note, they burnt the tostada, but they are killing it, which I think is in a good way.
Awesome.
So thank you for that. You touched a little bit on this. Are there any unconventional ways to use extra mole sauce? Obviously the empanadas and the molequiles, but there was one fun comment from Ashley, which is that she freezes extra mole in ice cube trays and then adds cubes to pinto beans or rice.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Wow, what a great idea. I'm going to have to try that.
And Danielle, before I forget, wanted to know what the name of the puesto was where you had those empanadas that you decided to write the book.
Oh my God. Wow. Okay. I have to look that up because I remember the ceramicist. I mean, I'm sure it had a name, but I mean, it was like tiny. It was probably the size of my kitchen. And there were two little tables. One was on the outside and one was on the inside. And my friend and I just like sat there on the outside and ate. I'll have to try and look for it because I know I can find the ceramicist. I know because I have it saved on my phone. So yes, I will get back with that. I wanted to say also, like, another really fun thing to do with leftover mole. And so one thing that's really common in Mexico, and it's very different than what we in the United States think of as enchiladas. Okay, so enchiladas are a really nice way of using a sauce to cover a tortilla. A lot of times, not necessarily in the restaurants, but like, you know, at home, you're buying tortillas probably on a daily basis and they get stale quickly, especially if they're fresh. And so a good way to revive them is to either make a chilaquila where you're smothering them in a sauce, or an enchilada, which means literally to bathe in a chili sauce. Now, you don't have to use a chili-based sauce. You can use tomato sauce, in which case the word changes from enchilada to entomatada. You can use a bean-based sauce, which is basically just like, any pot of beans that you have. Take your liquid with some of the beans, blend them up or smash them, and you want a thin sauce. And then you just dip your tortilla in that, and then that becomes an enfrijolada. And then you can do the same thing with a mole, in which case the word changes again to enmolada. And so that's a really fun way to use up leftover mole, and then you can fill it with cheese. You can fill it with shredded chicken, roasted vegetables, whatever you have, whatever you like. And the difference between an American styled enchilada and one that exists in Mexico is that American enchiladas tend to be a casserole. I mean, let's just be honest. And I grew up in Texas. I love a good Tex-Mex enchilada with a lot of either cheddar or American cheese on top. And that's what I grew up on. My dad used to work at this restaurant when he was in high school, and it was called El Patio in Austin, and he makes the best enchiladas in the universe. But they're very, very much Tex-Mex. It's a casserole in a 13x9 pan. You cook it. It's like got lots of melty, delicious cheese, all that. But that is very much an American construct that does not exist in Mexico. Enchiladas in Mexico are much easier, I think, because a lot of times they're literally just, you can buy them like on the streets, and it's because you've got like someone that's cooking either a sauce with like roasted vegetables and chicken or other meats, and they're literally just like they tap the tortilla in a little bit of the manteca or the grease. They griddle it, then put it in the sauce, fold it. They put something in the middle of it, a little bit of cheese, a little bit of onion, a little bit of chicken sometimes, fold it and serve it. So it's like a 30-second process, dip, fry, sauce, fold, done. And they're really good. And sometimes there's in enchiladas mineras, which is in the book, and enchiladas in the central part of the country are typically made with a guajillo sauce and served with stewed carrots, potatoes, and chicken, which I really like. And the enchilada is actually almost like a side dish. It's like in the US, it would be the equivalent of like the starchy side. And they're incredibly delicious. And like I said, it's just like super, super easy to make. And I just really like them. And it's a very different plate altogether than what I think most Americans are used to. Okay, I'm going to look at this. I still got a ways to go. All right, so I'm going to work on some green beans, and I will take more questions.
All right, let's start with Andrew's question. Rick, what is your favorite recipe from the cookbook?
Ooh, that's so hard. I adore, and this is probably the recipe that I've made most often, the pollo al pastor. But then I make other things, and I'm like, why didn't I make this in a long time? I'll talk about just different dishes that I love. So there's a dish in in Veracruz. It's the dish, or there are several different versions of this dish, but enchilpayado. So there's a chile in Tabasco. It's very similar to the chiltepín or the piquín chile. It's very, very hot. It's either a small little ball or a little tube. And they use that chili to make a cream sauce. So it's like, it's cream. It could be crema or sometimes they use a mayonnaise as well. And then they use that with seafood. And so it's sort of spicy and creamy. And I had a shrimp version, and then I also had a crab version. The crab version blew my mind. Like to be honest, I didn't know that I was going to like it, because I was like, I love crab and I love shrimp, but I was like, I don't know if I really am going to be into a heavy cream sauce. And I mean, I could not stop licking that plate. Like it was just mind blowing. And so then I kept ordering it, like everywhere I went, I would just order it. And, there were a lot of different versions of it. And And like I said, they make it with all sorts of different seafoods. But the crab enchilada was like mind blowing. Oh my goodness. So that's in the book. The pollo al pastor, it was sort of the same kind of thing. I was in Guanajuato, and the rotisserie chicken stands are pretty common. It actually reminds me in a lot of ways of like Paris. There are a lot of like rotisserie chicken stands, and you see in Paris, the chickens are circulating and all the drippings are dripping onto potatoes. And then a lot of times in Mexico, the drippings are falling onto chiles and onions. And then those are then, you buy your chicken, let's say you buy a half chicken or a whole chicken, and then they scoop up some of the roasted onions in the chicken juice, and then like some roasted jalapenos or serranos, and they serve that with it as well. So anyway, I was in Guanajuato, and I smelled pastor. I smelled the achiote and the orange and the cumin, and I was like, where is this? But it definitely had that smell of roasted chicken, and I could smell the wood from the rotisserie. And I kind of just like wandered the streets until I found the stand, and I saw like these brick red chickens just rotating around this open fire. And I was like, oh my God, like what a ridiculously amazing idea, pollo al pastor. And that recipe, probably the recipes that were hardest for me to develop was that one. And then the moles, mole amarillo, or sorry, not mole amarillo. I started out trying to make a mole negro, but it was like really, really difficult, and I didn't want to turn people off with that recipe, so I ended up doing the coloradito, which was easier. And the reason why the pollo al pastor was so difficult is because I didn't want to call for it to be grilled. Like I wanted you to be able to make it in your oven, and I couldn't get that flavor, and it made me so upset because I would bake these chickens. And all of this marinade, and then I would taste it, and I'm like, it doesn't taste like the one I had in Guanajuato. And for a little bit, I was like, I need to take a break, because I made like, I don't know, 4 of them, and I was like, I need to chill out because I'm just getting myself worked up. And then I made it again, and I decided to use moritas to give a little bit of smokiness to the marinade. And that ended up, and I changed the ratio of things so you got a better glaze, because either the glaze was like too gloopy or it just like fell off during the roasting, and I wanted it to caramelize. So anyway, I was very proud of the final result of that dish, and I've since written the same recipe but for turkeys for Thanksgiving, and I have made for several years now. I've made pavo al pastor, which is turkey al pastor, and it's insanely delicious. So yeah, now that I've said all that, maybe it is still my favorite recipe in the book.
I mean, the pastor it's available on our site. Thanks for making that available to all of our readers, Rick. That's one of my favorites. And I'm actually, with this perspective, actually one participant just direct messaged me just saying how helpful it is to get this firsthand perspective. And I agree, like you've brought a dish that I had a totally different relationship with to life for me in a way where I'm now super encouraged to, and actually quite motivated to cook it maybe tonight or tomorrow morning.
Right.
Before work.
Well, that's what I think is like so beautiful about, about the cuisine, about any cuisine, but, it's like, is pollo al pastor in Mexican, a Mexican canonical dish? Maybe not, maybe it doesn't exist in enough places to like have a place in the pantheon of Mexican cuisine, but it's like some guy had this idea for a business and did it, and it was fucking delicious. Like, so, celebrate it. And who cares if it's authentic or not? It's like, it exists and it's great. And if you go to Guanajuato, that is definitely the place you should go. But there's also the woman that makes the enchiladas mineras. Her name is Doña Lupe, and she has a little puesto, and it's like super hard to find, but I found it with my nose. Like I was looking on Google Maps and it's not there. And somebody tried to give me directions, and like Guanajuato is like, it's like a Tuscan, medieval village, it's built on a mountaintop, and there's like all these like tiny little alleys and windy streets, and they're really narrow, and the architecture is amazing, but like, every like block has a different street name or callejon or alley name. And so it was very difficult to find this place. And then I was like, wait, I smell chicken, carrots, and chile guajillo. I think I know where this place is. And I found it, and there's like a little plaque outside the door, and it says Doña Lupe's Enchiladas Mineras. And she serves enchiladas on weekdays, and then enchiladas and pozole on weekends. And those are your choices. And there were probably like 12 seats in there. And it was fantastic. And also she's like at the front of, like, you walk in the door and she's like right in the door, and she's like this little old woman, and she's just happy talking to everybody and just like making her enchiladas and the chicken. And it was such a beautiful experience. So highly recommend that place as well.
And that will definitely be on the next trip list. Rick, we have about 5 minutes left. So we have a couple of questions, but also want to make sure we can tie things together for everybody.
Yes. Ask away, and I'm going to plate.
Perfect. So this is a more specific question around Sonora. And if you have a favorite restaurant there, Laura Lane is based there and wants to know.
Ooh, in Sonora. Oh gosh. So there are a number of really amazing taquerias. Like, so the thing about Sonora is the beef. Like, the two things that I love the most were the beef and flour tortillas. Growing up in Texas, flour tortillas were more common for me and my family because my mom and my relatives made them. But in Sonora, like, they also make sobaqueras. Sobaqueras are large format flour tortillas. So they can be like, sorry, I'm gonna put my plate down. They can be like this big. And they're served with like carne asadas, or they make burros or burritones, or sometimes burritos, the smaller versions, or sometimes they just like you're getting like your plate of guisos, or like a family style serving bowls of guisos, and they'll just put like one or two of the sobaqueras on the middle of the table, and you just like tear them apart and break your tortillas and share with the table. And they are really, really good. I have to look in my notes and find like the names of the taquerias that I really, really liked. And maybe as a follow-up, Jorge, we can like talk about how the best way to like get information to people, or like to answer these follow-up questions.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and I also have a really good friend that, if you like coffee, she's a really, really great coffee shop in Hermosillo. I don't know where you live. Other places in Sonora are great for machaca. I love machaca, and the machaca in Sonora is incredible. And there are a few very, very small towns, depending on where you live. If you're really into machaca, you can go to those towns and get it directly from them, and it's amazing. Okay. I am ready to plate. Also, I'm like super excited about this, so I'm gonna show you my plate. That is my mole amarillo with my chochoyotes, and I am very excited. I was very distraught last night because I couldn't eat my mole, and also didn't have the chochoyotes in it, so I couldn't do anything. So I ordered pizza instead and just ate that. But I am very, very excited. This is really good served with tortillas. Definitely, if you have any leftovers, make empanadas. You can make sopes, you can make gorditas and stuff it with that. Definitely, you want to have some nice tortilla or some corn product to like soak up all this delicious mole. And I'm just gonna give it a little taste, even though it's like super, super hot. Wow. Oh my God. The other the flavors, it actually has a nice kick. Like the chihuahuas do have a nice bite. All of those spices plus the richness of the chicken, it's really good. You get a little bit of sweetness from the vegetables and the onions, and then the chayote. One of the other nice things about having the chayote is in there is it gives a really nice kind of silky mouthfeel and texture. It's similar to a gumbo, but it's not quite as it doesn't have quite the same consistency as like okra, but it does have a little bit of that sort of slick mouthfeel, and it's just really, really pleasant. I want to thank you so much for joining me in this class. I hope you had a great time. I hope you enjoyed like me talking for 90 minutes straight. And I definitely hope you make this recipe because it's really, really delicious. And I'm going to actually start making it more often because I'm like, why not? I need to start making it for my friends in my new kitchen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rick. This was such a pleasure to join along with you. For everybody who would like to buy another copy of Mi Cocina for your friends or family, loved ones, it's available literally everywhere books are sold. Obviously, please remember to support your independent bookstores. A lot of folks requested that we do this again sometime, so we'll try to figure something out that makes sense, and we will also send some follow-up questions. We'll send some follow-up questions, Rick, so we can get some of the last hanging items answered, as well as the recording for everybody to see this at your leisure. But Rick, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be with you as always.
Thank you so much. Here, say much.